My relationship with JRPGs is kinda weird. Despite being a massive weeaboo, I had up until the start of 2022 only played one game in the genre. That game was Pokemon Leaf Green, and honestly, that hardly counts as a JRPG. Everything did however change in January 2022, when I got to borrow a Nintendo Switch from a friend. The real reason for borrowing it was so that I could play Breath of the Wild, but there was this one other game in his collection that caught my attention. That game was Final Fantasy VII. Half a year later, I had played every single Final Fantasy game from 4 to 10, and I loved every single one of them. Knowing this, you can understand that I went into Chrono Trigger with extremely high expectations. It is after all considered to be the best game in the entire genre by many people. I think it's best to start with what really makes Chrono Trigger stand out to me. The combat. Unlike what's the norm in JRPGs, Chrono Trigger does not contain any random encounters at all. You heard me right. No random encounters in a JRPG in 1995. I know, I can hardly believe it either, and I played the damn game. Instead, you walk around in the world seeing enemies walking about, and if you touch them, you have to fight them. Instead of moving you to a dedicated combat arena, the combat starts seamlessly and takes place on the game map, pitting you against all the enemies that happen to be on the screen when combat was initiated. Now the innovations don't end here. Instead of having two groups standing on two edges of the screen punching each other when it's their turn, the participants will move around on the battlefield during the fight, with the positioning of the various characters changing what abilities are effective. Chrono does for example have a spin attack in which he strikes an enemy and all enemies nearby. This will however only work if the enemies stand close enough together, since the area of the spin attack is very limited. It gets even more complicated though. The various abilities the characters have can be combined with each other to form powerful combos. The spin attack can for example be combined with Lucas' flame attack to create a fire spin attack. However, everything does not work this well. Like most JRPGs, the combat is slow. I'd even say that it's slower than most, because there can often be quite a large number of enemies in a single fight. This is especially bothersome when you've outleveled them and have to sit through their weak attacks knowing that one AoE attack is enough to kill them all. You remember how I said that the game was innovative? This really shows when it comes to the design of the boss encounters. There's a ton of variation when it comes to the boss mechanics. None of the fights are as simple as simply punching the boss while healing your party, and no two fights work the same. The quality is however a mixed bag. Some encounters work incredibly well and others don't. At one point we get to fight a massive computer, and she receives healing from 3 computer screens behind her. The screens are extremely easy to destroy, but if you destroy all 3, it greatly increases her damage output and it ramps up even more as the fight goes on. So you can decide between trying to burst her down after destroying all of the screens, or try to outdamage the healing from a single screen that you leave alive to prevent her from entering her enrage phase. That is however easier said than done, since most of your really powerful attacks are AoE attacks, which means that they will kill the last screen. This creates a fun and challenging encounter that can be solved in more than one way, and most of the fights in the game follows this theme. At another point in the game, we get to fight a skeleton in a desert cave. It has a very high damage resistance, and in order to damage it, we need to first attack it with a water-based spell, and hit it with another damaging ability. As with many boss mechanics, this is first introduced to us by the normal enemies in the cave, and during those encounters, the mechanic actually works really well. The issue is that the skeleton in the boss encounter deals a lot of damage to your party, so one of your characters has to constantly cast healing spells. The character casting the water abilities also can't do damage, so you're left with a single character doing all of the actual damage dealing. Since the skeleton also heals itself by draining health from your party, the amount of net damage you do each turn is really low. This fight took me over 10 minutes to do, and I went through the same 3 abilities every single turn. 1 AoE heal, 1 AoE water, and 1 damaging ability. The balancing of the encounters is also really off. For most of the game, the encounters are extremely easy, to the extent that it actually hurts the experience. And then it occasionally hits you with huge difficulty spikes, seemingly out of nowhere. This is normal to some extent in all JRPGs, but I feel like it's a bit too extreme here in Chrono Trigger. Another weird balancing decision is the lack of AoE healing in the game. There are spells that can do it, but they are all extremely weak. This leads to many encounters actually being easier if you allow 1 or 2 people in your party to die, because then you can focus your healing on a smaller number of characters. Yes, what I'm showing you is a legitimate strategy to fight bosses in this game that I used in more than one fight. It's time to talk about visuals, so let's get one thing out of the way here. I'm biased as fuck. When I was a kid, I absolutely worshipped the Dragon Ball manga. So when a game's art is created by the man, the myth, the legend, Akira Toriyama himself, I just can't speak badly about it. And honestly, how could you? The art in this game is absolutely spectacular. That is, as long as you keep the graphics on the normal settings. On the PC version of the game, which is how I played it, there is a setting that allows you to turn on remastered graphics. These remastered graphics, quite frankly, look terrible. And this is not just me saying this to be an old game elitist. With the updated graphics, the edges between the blocks of pixels that make up the backgrounds become extremely easy to see, and it looks really jarring. Once you know that these borders are there, you can see them with the normal graphics as well, but you actually have to look for them to find them. So keep this setting turned off if you want a good experience with the game. When you play a JRPG, or any Japanese game for that matter, you also expect a real banger of a soundtrack, and Chrono Trigger really doesn't disappoint here. It was Yasunori Mitsuda's debut as a video game composer, and he hit it out of the park on his first try. We get some absolutely great combat music. There is a lot of great ambient music. But the best song of them all is Frog's theme. It perfectly encapsulates the heroism of his character, and it really hypes you up for what's to come later in the game. Overall, the soundtrack is extremely consistent, both in style and in quality. All of these things are of course well and good, but I think it's time to get talking about the stuff that will truly make or break an RPG. Is the story gripping? Are the characters interesting? Are the quests fun and varied? Honestly, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but mostly my answer to these questions is yes. The story has us play as the aptly named Chrono, a teenage boy from the town of Truce in the present day. Today is a very special day because it's the Great Millennial Fair, celebrating the kingdom's 1000th anniversary. At the fair we run into Marl, who is actually the tomboyish Princess Nadia, who has run away from her home to have some fun at the fair. After playing around at the fair with the princess for a while, we head over to the main attraction. A teleportation device created by Chrono's childhood friend Luca. But when trying the device out, something goes wrong. Marl is suddenly sucked into a portal, and it's up to us to chase after her. On the other side of the portal, we find ourselves 400 years back in time, during the Middle Ages. What lies before us is an epic adventure through time and space. where we will meet tons of interesting characters, resolve disputes, save societies from destruction, and hopefully save the planet itself from its inevitable doom. Each era has a character of its own assigned to it. The previously mentioned Luca and Marl are the characters from the present day, and together with Chrono they make up the core of the party. In the future we encounter Robo, a robot who has had his memory wiped for some reason. He initially joins the party to help us find a way back to the present day, but he decides to stick around when he realizes that the main characters treat him as a friend rather than the tool he's been all his life. Besides, the key to figuring out his past is out there somewhere, and he's not going to be able to find it without some help. During the prehistoric times we run into Ayla. She's a strong, stupid but kind woman who is the leader of the humans during this era. Her tribe is locked in a war with the dinosaurs, and we have to help her save our ancestors from extinction. In the Middle Ages, we have Frog, everyone's favorite character, playing into the classic Western fairy tale trope of a prince being turned into a frog. He's a knight with unwavering loyalty to the royal family. His story is a gripping tale of sacrifice and learning to accept yourself for who you are, and it is one of the absolute highlights of the whole game. One thing that very much ties into the storytelling of the game is a time travel mechanic. At first, we are limited to a very linear set of portals that are introduced to us when the story needs us to move on to the next area, but over the course of the game we are slowly given more and more ways to traverse through time. Unfortunately, this is mostly just an illusion of choice initially. While we could, for example, go to prehistoric times as soon as we get access to the first set of time travel options, there's nothing there until we've triggered a quest we get later in the game to go back in time to find the Dreamstone. I quite frankly don't understand why they even left this in as a thing the player could do, because it's not really utilized as a mechanic at all. Of course, I'm just nitpicking right now. The linearity of the story allows the game to make our actions throughout the story be more meaningful, because the developers don't have to take into consideration how the order we do things might affect the outcome. The story itself is quite complex with a lot of moving parts. Having it arc into several different directions because of choices you make simply wouldn't be feasible for a 25-hour long game that also needs to be able to fit onto a Super Nintendo cartridge. The time travel element also allows the game to tackle world building in a very interesting way. Throughout the story, we get to experience most of the major historical events of the world firsthand, and this really helps form a deeper connection with the world. It's very refreshing to see, especially considering there are many otherwise amazing games in this genre that really struggle with their world building. The previously mentioned linearity does however go away towards the end of the game. At this point, we are now free to tackle the final boss. Or, well, you can technically go fight the final boss whenever you want. You're just not going to win. But before we go fight him, we get a choice to do a couple of side quests to prepare. These quests are quite varied in scope, but what they all have in common is that they span multiple different eras and truly utilize the time travel mechanic to its fullest potential. This could be things like having to hire carpenters in the past to make an area accessible in the future, or smuggling treasure into the castle during the Middle Ages so that it will be available for us in the present day. These quests also function as companion quests for the various characters in your party, so a large part of their character development is handled at this part of the game. Because of this, I would consider them to be more or less mandatory to get the full experience. So, do I think you should play Chrono Trigger? Yes, you should. My initial impressions of it were hurt a lot by the extreme levels of praise this game gets from basically everyone. But while it's not the masterpiece it's often portrayed as, it is still an incredibly good game. The lack of random encounters also makes it the perfect place to start if you've never played a JRPG before. The biggest flaws comes with the balancing issues, but they are not major enough to severely hurt the experience in my opinion. The time travel element is also a bit underutilized, but in the end it does tell a great story with lots of twists and turns. As with most retro games, it's also pretty cheap. It's $15 on Steam when it's at full price, and I'd say that it's definitely worth that. But if you still don't want to pay that much, it goes on sale all the time. So, what is my final score? I give this game a 9 out of 10. Buy it, play it, and fall in love with a goddamn frog. Thanks for watching everyone, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and do any further notification related stuff that might be required if you're watching this video in the future. The production of this video took absolute ages, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys and admit that it was not because it was unusually hard to make or anything. It's just that the new Zelda game came out and it has kinda distracted me from everything else here in life. The next video will be covering either Final Fantasy X or Armored Core. I'm working on both of them in parallel right now, and I don't know which one I'll finish first. I'm also considering doing something on a couple of old NES games or something like that as well. Those are significantly smaller in scope than a full-blown JRPG and will help me put some stuff out in between these larger projects.